I'm sure you're all aware. And so with that, we're committed to educate, advocate, and bringing attention to the challenges individuals with brain injuries face. So today is one of those opportunities for us to do just that. So I want to thank you all for being here today, for your commitment to Brain Injury Awareness Month and education to learn more about, how we could bring that awareness. If you're interested in learning about more ways to get involved, we do have some additional opportunities through like our program. We have launched a toolbox, and so I will include that link in the chat if anybody has any interest in checking that out. So just going to include that there real quick. A few quick housekeeping details. So throughout the presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have a question, if you can send them in the chat, Michelle will pause for some question breaks throughout the presentation. And so with that, we'll go through about 2 to 3 questions per break in the order we receive them. And then so if your question doesn't get answered in that question break, there will be additional opportunity for that. And then at the end, we'll try to wrap up with whatever other questions we have for those who can stay on, or some additional follow-up. I'll make sure to include this information in the chat as well. But we will be recording today's webinar, which will later be published on our public website. So if you have questions of a personal nature, please consider reaching out after the webinar to either Brain Injury and Recovery our email, or Michelle Wild, and we'll be sure to answer that off the recording. And so without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Michelle, who is the founder and CEO of Best Brain Education Strategies and Technology. Michelle, if you want to get us started, that would be great.
Thanks, Brianna. Thank you. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. I will not be able to see the chat, so Heather and Brianna have agreed to help me out with that. So before we get started, though, one of the things that I did want to say is it's important that what we're doing today and what we did last week really relates to more than just one stakeholder, if you will, within the area of brain injury. So I try to approach what I do from the perspective of helping people with brain injuries, living with brain injuries, providers, family members, if there might be some family members in participating today. That's all great. I'll try to give different examples so that, it's helpful for everyone, but I just wanted to make sure that you know that you are welcome regardless of what your relationship might be to brain injury. And so with that, I will go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. If I can find it, let's see here. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen. Is that correct, Brianna?
Yep, I can see your screen.
Okay, awesome. So when I do multiple sessions in anything, I tend to do what's called an iterative review. And so I'm going to do it with you because I think it's important not just for us to sort of review what we talked about the first time we were together last week for the first session of this 2-part series, but I also want to have you start thinking about how can you use this concept of an iterative review for yourself. So if you are a provider, how can I integrate the concept of iterative review with the clients that you might be working with or the consumers? If you are an individual living with a brain injury, how can I integrate this concept of iterative review in my everyday life? So I'm going to try and explain that to you and show you how to do that. So one of the things that we talked about last week, the whole purpose of iterative review is you take an opportunity. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to take 10 minutes, but take a few minutes and think about what you already know about whatever the topic is that you might be thinking about or that you might be talking about. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look over 3 main concepts that we talked about in the last session, and we're just going to kind of look at it. We're going to review it. I want you to stop and think, okay, what do I remember about this? It's not important in the iterative review time that you have that you remember everything. It's not even about being right all the time. It's just about integrating this concept of, you know what, I want to pull some information from my long-term memory. I want to think a little bit more about it. I want to think about how this new information relates to what I already know, what I already have in my long-term memory. And then I want to what they call reconsolidate that back into your long-term memory. This is a really great memory technique. And again, it can be used by individuals living with brain injury. It can also be used by providers or family members. So last week, we talked about something that I think is really important, and that's that active learner's credo. And the active learner's credo is what I hear, I forget. What I hear and see, I remember a little. What I hear, see, and ask questions about or discuss with someone else, I begin to understand. What I hear, see, discuss, and do, I acquire knowledge and skill. And what I teach to another, I master. And so we spent a lot of time last week talking about this. What I want you to take away from it is that you have to be engaged. You have to be actively engaged if you're going to learn new information. And so you can't just sit back and listen to a webinar. You can't just sit back and listen to a lecture. If you are a individual living with a brain injury, you can't just sit back and listen to what your therapist says. You have to engage more, because if all you do is sit back and listen, the likelihood is that you won't remember it. If you engage other senses, maybe you take some notes or other things like that, then you're going to begin to remember a little bit. When you really start getting it is when you start engaging, like we just described, and asking questions or talking about it with someone else. So one opportunity that you have to begin to understand all this stuff that we're talking about is to put a question in the chat. It's a great way of engaging. Another option is after the session is over, talk to someone about it. Tell someone what you did. Tell someone one thing that you learned, something that stood out in your mind. All of these little techniques or strategies are going to help you learn the information better, retain it better, and ultimately be able to use it better. Okay, so the next one is what I hear, see, discuss, and do. You acquire skill and knowledge. You've got to do it. You've got to practice it. Today is all about strategies. So we're going to be talking about strategies in a whole bunch of different executive function areas today. And you need to make sure that you have these strategies. You've got the handouts, right? So you're going to have them written down. Take a few extra notes on the side and then practice them. The doing part is where you begin to acquire that knowledge or that skill. And then finally, what I teach to another, I master. Again, once you've practiced it, once you are involved in it, start telling other people about it. Even if you don't have all the answers, it's okay. The idea is that you're engaging with them, and by doing that, your memory and your learning is going to strengthen. We also talked about the 4 stages of learning. We started with that first stage, which is unfortunately called the ignorant stage. And that's where we really don't know what we don't know about things. And so maybe after the brain injury, if you have a TBI, maybe after the brain injury, you don't realize that you struggle paying bills now. You know, I've always done it. You don't even pay attention to the fact that you might be struggling with that. I'll give you a quick story. I've had quite a few people actually in the past who have mentioned that they have written the wrong amount on a check. Okay. Someone wrote a check for $10,000 instead of $1,000. The ignorance was he didn't know that he was struggling in this area. The awareness was, oh my gosh, I just wrote this check for so much more. And now there's issues associated with that, which I'm sure you can understand. So that's the ignorance and the awareness stage. The learning stage is when he recognizes that he's struggling with writing checks in this particular case, and he comes up with some strategies. You know what? I'm going to double check, or you can have all sorts of different strategies that you could try to implement in with this particular issue. And so that's when you're learning. The mastery is when you've nailed it. You've got the strategies become kind of automatic to you, and you really are not having to go through step by step by step every single thing, because you've mastered it and it's become more automatic. We then talked about self-regulation and the self-regulation process. And we talked about the three different phases of self-regulation and then sort of that overarching thing, which is called reflection. So the first stage of self-regulation is the planning stage. And the planning stage is when you're sort of setting the stage for the process, for whatever it is you're about to do. It's not always about learning, it can just be going to the store, but it's when you are going to set the stage. And so you're going to ask yourself, what's my purpose? What do I already know? What plan am I going to come up with in order to pull this thing off? And then finally, what strategies will help me with this? So that's the planning stage. The monitoring stage is once you've engaged in the thing, whatever the thing is, let's say you're going to Costco. Once you've engaged, you're at Costco and you have these strategies and you have this plan in place. Monitoring is while you're in Costco, you're sort of checking things out. How am I doing? All right, how is this going? It took me a lot longer to get here, or there's more people here than I thought there was going to be. And if you have a traumatic brain injury or if you have post-traumatic stress and you go into an environment that's really overwhelming, very overstimulating, like Costco, right off the bat, you're going to potentially have some issues. But if it's really busy, it's even worse. So monitoring phase is sort of you recognize, oh my gosh, this is not working for me. And you make the choice to maybe back off and come back on a different day. That's not a failure, that's a success because you're taking care of yourself. You're monitoring, you're realizing, oh, this isn't quite working for me. What are some of my options? And in that planning phase, you can actually plan for what happens if this doesn't go so well. The third phase is the evaluation phase, and that's after it's done. So after you've left Costco, whether you left because you needed to, because it was too busy, or whether you got everything you needed and you're leaving, later at a later point in time, the evaluation phase is really important because that's when you are checking in with yourself and saying, okay, how did this go? What worked? What didn't work? Right? Did I get distracted? What do I need to do differently next time? That's what's happening during that evaluation phase. And then finally, the reflection phase, I think I mentioned last week, to me, that's like the hardest phase of all because it's sort of this overarching awareness that you can develop as you practice this process over and over and over again. In my opinion, the reflection part of self-regulation doesn't occur until you've kind of mastered it, going back to our previous stages of learning. Once you've mastered the three phases, then reflection can begin to occur. That's just my opinion on that. All right, let's see. Brianna, that was sort of our quick iterative review. Do we have any questions or anything at this point?
Not yet. Does anybody have any questions? Can you drop them in the chat, please? I don't have any currently, Michelle.
Um, Michelle, we cannot hear you, but I'm not sure where the volume went. So let me see what's going on.
Okay.
Oh, we can hear you now.
Oh, you got me? Okay, good. Excellent. I don't know what the heck that is all about, but okay, I'm going to go back to my slides. I was saying one of the things I think would be really helpful for you guys and for me and for Brianna and Heather maybe is think about this idea of iterative review. How helpful is this, right? Do you think this is helpful? Because if you are a provider, doing this iterative review, going over, like let's take a couple minutes at the beginning of our session and talk about what we did last time, right? Let's do a quick review. And that it sets the stage for the meeting, right? It puts you in a situation where you are both on the same page. And so that's really important. If you are a individual living with a brain injury, same thing. Go into your therapist's office, go in and talk to your provider and say, you know what, I'd like to review a little bit about what we talked about last time before we move on, right? All you're doing is getting on the same page with whoever the person is. And that can be extremely beneficial. Because if you're not on the same page and you're in a meeting, You're getting frustrated, they're getting frustrated, and all of a sudden you don't get what you need. Your needs are not being met in that situation. So take just a few minutes to do your own iterative review. The other way to do it might be if I'm meeting with Brianna, I do my own iterative review before I go in and meet with her. And I go in and I say, Brianna, last time in our last session, we talked about these couple of things. I've had a few other thoughts about them. Or I just wanted you to know, Brianna, that I have kind of reviewed what we talked about last time and, here, let's take it from there, or whatever the case might be. Think about that idea of the stages of learning and the I can't think of the word right now, the active nature of it. You have to be an active participant in stuff, and you have that ability. And so I really want to encourage you to apply some of these strategies that we're going to talk about today in order for you to have better control over your own environment and what you're doing, and also hopefully help you get more out of what you need. Okay. All right. I'm going to share again here. And we're going to start with the concept of attention. So attention is a very common area of concern after brain injury. And so what is attention? Well, it's paying attention to all parts of a task, no matter how small. So attention is when you are kind of focused in on key things that are a part of the bigger picture. Okay. So you're looking at all parts of the task, no matter how small. And sometimes I myself do this where I don't pay enough attention to the details. And so, like if I'm doing a webinar or something like that, there might be a spelling error. And you know what? Man, I missed it because I'm not paying attention to all the aspects of it. We all can struggle in this particular area. You're not alone. And so this may be where I try to have people look over my slides before I submit them for conferences and stuff, because I don't want to make mistakes on them, but I know that I do. And so I have to be realistic about that. So here's some attention scenarios for you. Uh, when you struggle with distractions, okay, that might be an example of an attentional issue. When you struggle with letting go of things, you kind of perseverate. Perseveration is an interesting word. It kind of comes from perseverance, but it's like the more negative side of that. Perseveration is when you get stuck on something and you can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop doing it. And so when you are hyper focused on something, sometimes it's hard to let go of things. Another issue with attention is when you struggle with attention, you have a hard time completing tasks because you get distracted and you go from one task to the next task to the next, and you never really get anything done. Okay. Another scenario is when you struggle with multitasking. I know that multitasking has been around for a very long time, but I also know that a lot of the newer research indicates that multitasking is really not as good an idea, or not even as possible as we have always thought. And so oftentimes what happens with multitasking is the individual is moving from one thing and back and forth, and you're able to switch quickly. But the issue is, whoops, something happened here.
Yep, it looks like we have a white screen from the slides.
Okay, let me go back to my sharing. I could see that something happened, but I don't know what it was. Okay, now I'm looking for my slideshow again, and just a minute. I'm so sorry. I think I have to stop it and then start it up again here.
All good technical issues are part of the fun of the virtual space.
Indeed. Well, if you need me to edit this so that we don't have all these little glitches in there, I would be happy to do that, but before you put it on your website. Man, okay, well, I'm not finding it, so I'm going to do this a slightly different way, if you don't mind. I'm going to choose this whole screen. Now, can you see my slides okay?
Yep, we can see your slides.
Okay, awesome. There's always more than one solution to a problem. So multitasking, again, is one of those things that may not be as readily possible or as readily available as we may think it is. And then the last one is a lot of times people with attentional issues struggle with following longer conversations. They get lost in the conversation because they may be trying to focus so much on a detail and then they miss all sorts of other things. Or they have a really hard time focusing on the detail and then they miss everything as well. So, can you guys relate to any of that? Anyone in the audience, can you kind of relate to those scenarios? I can't see the chat, Brianna, so can you tell me if we got a...
Right now we're getting a lot of thumbs up, and then it looks like we do have a hand. Let me try to see if we can get these mics working. So Margaret, I did allow your mic,
Thank,
or enable
yeah.
it, so I think you should be able to go. Perfect.
Thank you. I would say that, yeah, in my role as a counselor and therapist at a vet center, I am 100%, what's the word I'm looking for here? Try to multitask in terms of all the efforts. And I know that it takes my attention away from what needs to be done. And then I can find myself going down rabbit holes instead. So, I really just meant to give you a thumbs up on that notion.
Oh, well, good. Thank you. You know, something that you said, it was Margaret, right?
Yes.
Yeah, something that you said just made me think of something that I want to mention here. And, you know, I don't know what everyone does that's online, and I don't know how your offices or whatever set up. But here's a really important thing. If you are a provider and you are working with people with brain injuries, uh, it will be very helpful for them if your desk is not got paper all over it. And maybe your desk needs to have paper all over it, and that's okay. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second so I can kind of see as well. But maybe your desk needs to have paper all over it. Well, if that's the case, try to bring your chair around so that they're looking at you and they're not looking at your stuff, if that makes sense. I remember many times I had a student and he just hated going to one of our teachers' classes. And it wasn't because he had anything personal against the teacher. She had really big earrings that were such a distraction for him that he could not focus. And so he didn't want to go to her class because he knew that he wasn't able to focus. And then she'd get upset and, you know, it just would deteriorate. So, you know, that's something when we're talking about attention, and we're getting to the strategies here in just a second, that's a strategy that some of you may be able to implement. Be aware of your surroundings, and that if you are a provider, the person with a brain injury may be very distracted by a lot of what you have in there. And if you are a person with a TBI, know that you might be distracted by that and ask if there's some way, maybe, you know, where you could go to a different room, or you could sit in a different, like maybe the chair is facing one direction and you ask if you can move the chair slightly because of the distraction. And I hope that the providers here will understand that the individual with the brain injury is asking for that because it's something they need in order for you to better help them.
Well,
right?
that is
A lot of times people
great
will...
concrete advice. Thank you. Seriously,
sure.
can use that.
Oh, good. Yeah, a lot of times what happens for brain injury survivors is they will ask for something that they need, and they get resistance sometimes. It's like, you know, oh, well, you don't need that. Or the person will sometimes ignore it. Obviously, I'm not talking to you, Margaret. I'm just giving you general strategies here. But the idea is, you know, if they ask for something and you don't know if it's reasonable or not, ask them why they need that. Like, well, why do you need to move your chair around? Because it's going to help them better explain it to you, and it's going to help you understand as the provider that they have these needs, and that certainly we're focused on attention right now, right? Their attention can be very easily distracted. They call it squirrel, right? You'll be talking to a person with a brain injury, squirrel, and they get so distracted so easily. So,
Michelle, you have a question, Loretta? Can you,
Thank you. This is great. I'm a nurse care coordinator in home telehealth at the VA, and I'm working on getting more skills about PTSD and traumatic brain injury, things like that, and how to help my veterans. My son is a hero. He retired a year ago in the end of March uh, as a Navy SEAL after 22 years, and he had traumatic brain injury. You name it, he had it. And what's amazing, I wanted to go back to the multitasking.
Mhm.
If it's about what he did in the military, he can multitask like
Yeah.
nobody's business. You cannot even believe it. He can totally tune you out and do 15 other things about that. But if
Mhm.
you try to get him to not think about his job and just concentrate on something, he can't do that. Not even
Yeah.
one thing.
Yeah. It's not
So,
uncommon, actually. I think that we see that more often than you would guess. And it's because what they're focused on is so overly familiar to them, right? He spent his entire career doing these things. And so that information is still there. New stuff, that's why the stages of learning is so important. And some of the stuff that we're talking about, that's where it gets very difficult for people after brain injury. Okay. So, Loretta, if you are interested, any of you, please reach out to me. I would be happy to talk to you more about this and stuff. So please reach out.
I would
Okay, I'm
love
going to go
that.
Michelle, I had
ahead.
Thank
one more
you.
question.
Oh,
Uh,
sure, go ahead.
from Jennifer Minich, what is brain dumping?
I will get there in just a second. So that's one of the strategies listed. Now, can you guys see my screen, Brianna? Yeah, okay.
Yep, we
Uh,
can see a screen.
okay, perfect. So some strategies that you can use to help with attentional issues are earplugs. And you can do like earbuds, you can do noise canceling headphones. A lot of times people don't want to wear headphones because you don't just walk around with them a lot of the time. But earplugs or earbuds, like Apple iPod, AirPods, or something like that, can be very, very effective tools. Setting a timer for yourself. One of the things that happens after brain injury is people's the passage of time for individuals after brain injury often gets really disrupted. And so what seems like 5 minutes has been an hour and a half, or what seems like forever has just been a few minutes. And that can be very disruptive to them. Hanging a do not disturb sign on the door. And some people have said, well, I don't, that's kind of rude. Well, then make a cute little sign or something. It's like, hey, dude, I'm busy, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be do not disturb. It's just something to let you, your friends, your family, your roommates, whatever it might be, know that you need that concentrated time and have a conversation with them about it, that that is time that you need and that it is okay, that you want them to be okay with that, and that you, once you take that sign down, then you're more available. Turning off your phone is another attentional strategy, or certainly turning on do not disturb on your phone. If you have a Android phone, do not disturb focus feature. If you have an Apple phone, taking notes. Remember, we were talking about just listening doesn't really get you very far. So listening, engaging more senses can actually help with attention as well. And so take some notes down. You don't have to write word for word. You're just looking for main ideas and you're doing something that's helping you focus. Do a brain dump. So what that means is a lot of times what happens is people have a lot of information in their head and they try to keep it all in their head. And oftentimes after a brain injury, that's very difficult to do. And so doing a brain dump, it's sort of like writing down all the things that you need to do. Then you can organize them and then you can do different things. But if you try to keep everything in your head, what ends up happening is you lose a lot of it. And as you're losing it, you get more frustrated, and then that can be problematic. So, doing a brain dump is sort of just taking a moment to put down everything that you're thinking so you can sort of free your head up for something else. And then I kind of mentioned this for the office, eliminate unnecessary items. So, if if you guys could see the desk that I'm standing at right now, some of you with brain injuries might go, oh my gosh, this is totally overstimulating. It is for me too, but I'm able to deal with it in a different way. Okay. And so I would prefer that it wasn't a mess, but sometimes it becomes a mess and we just have to, we might have to move things to the side or whatever it is so that we can have clarity and be able to focus our attention. I have a standing desk and I do have some piles on it. And when I bring my computer where I am now, I usually take the piles and put them somewhere else so that my desk is clear. Because if it's not clear, I will get distracted. Okay, I don't know if we have any quick questions on the attention stuff. We have about 5 other cognitive areas that we're going to talk about today. So
Currently, you don't have any remaining questions right now.
okay. So the next topic that I really wanted to talk about, because I think this is extremely important for providers as well as for individuals living with brain injury as well as family members, and that is neurofatigue, right? So neurofatigue is the feeling of being mentally tired to the point of not being able to do what you want to do or what you need to do, okay? It's like this cognitive overload. And when the cognitive overload happens, you shut down. A lot of people describe it as like Wile E. Coyote, if you're old enough to know the cartoon. Wile E. Coyote like goes up against a wall and just sort of slides down. That's kind of how a lot of people describe neurofatigue. Okay. And so struggles with neurofatigue can include things like working too long on a single task. And I know a lot of people say, well, I got to get it done. I feel like I have to get it done because if I stop, then I won't know where I left off. Okay, that's fine and dandy, but you should still take breaks, right? You don't have to go for an hour away, but get up, move around, grab a glass of water, pet the dog, do whatever. Give yourself some time to just sort of calm down a little bit, right? Because when you're so hyper focused on a single task, I don't know if this happens to you, but a lot of times what happens is you start getting anxious. You don't even know you're getting anxious, but it's happening. And the more anxiety that you experience because you're in that state, the less productive you're going to be in the long run. And so the idea is if you focus on the task for 3 hours, you may not be focused for the 3 hours. You might only get about an hour's worth of work done. But if you work for 20 minutes and then you take a 10-minute break and then you work 20 minutes and then a 10-minute break or 30 minutes and then a 10-minute break, guess what? You end up with like 2 hours worth of good work versus 1 hour. And you're not putting yourself to that point of exhaustion where you can't function. Okay. People struggle with not taking breaks. We just talked about that. People struggle with trying to multitask. Multitasking is a surefire way of initiating neurofatigue. If you try to do too many things, it's going to happen. Also, if you have overstimulation, too much stuff on the desk, too bright of lights, the wrong kinds of lights, right? Too much noise, certain high-pitched sounds, or whatever the case might be, those are all areas that kind of impact that neurofatigue thing. So here's some strategies for neurofatigue. Pace your activities. Some of you may be familiar with the Pomodoro techniques. Very well known, very old technique. You work for 20 minutes and then you take a break for 10 minutes and then you work for 20 minutes, etc. My experience with the Pomodoro is that that's not really an effective strategy for people with traumatic brain injury. Because for some people, 20 minutes, and for some tasks, 20 minutes is too long. And for other tasks, 20 minutes, they can do 30 or 40 minutes. And so you want to learn to pace yourself. And that means each activity that you do may have a different amount of time that you can do it and not get tired. Okay. The other thing about pacing yourself is a lot of times certain symptoms will arise because you are neurofatigued, because you're not pacing yourself. Okay. And so if you read a book for an hour, you might end up with a migraine. But if you read the same book for 40 minutes, you might be fine. So you have to learn to pace the activities that you do. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. You want to monitor yourself and make sure that you're taking breaks, and make sure that you're taking breaks that will revitalize you. I had a person that I worked with many years ago, and he was a kind of a handyman. And he came to me because he was having some real problems on the job, because he was getting frustrated and angry and kind of acting out a bit. And what was really interesting is we talked about pacing and monitoring your breaks and all that. And so I asked him, well, what do you do when you take a break? And he said, oh, well, if I'm painting and I need a break, I'll just go over and I'll start wrapping up the electrical cord. I'm like, okay, that's not a break, right? That's just a different job. And so we worked on not only getting him to recognize that he needed to take a break, but what kinds of breaks actually revitalized him. And it made all the difference in the world, in his productivity, in his recommendations, in his frustration, all that. So that's something to think about. Include white space when you're scheduling your appointments. One of the worst things that you can do after brain injury is have one appointment after the other, after the other, after the other, and not realize that you may need to take a break, or not anticipating how long it might take you to get from one place to another. And so you may have a doctor's appointment that goes until 1 o'clock, and then your next doctor's appointment is at 1:15 or 1:30. And at the time you thought, well, that's fine, except for it takes a half an hour to get there. And now you've just wiped yourself out. So making sure that you have white space in your calendar is very important. Prioritizing your activities. And prioritizing your activities, you can use a variety of different kinds of ways of prioritizing based on time and urgency and, those kinds of things. My perspective is identify what attributes are most important to you and to that activity, and then prioritize accordingly. Be sure to take breaks, and you can break tasks and activities down into smaller chunks. That's always a really important one. And some of these strategies you're going to see over and over again, because a single strategy can work in a variety of different areas of your life. Another strategy for neurofatigue is to add extra time to work on your activities. If you think it's going to take you half an hour, give yourself 45 minutes. Don't put yourself under a lot of pressure and stress, because that also is going to trigger that neurofatigue. And then the final strategy here is to work on one activity at a time. We were talking about multitasking. Multitasking is, again, one of the surefire ways of initiating neurofatigue. So if you can work on one activity at a time, take some breaks, I think you'll see that your neurofatigue can be improved somewhat. Okay, questions?
You have one from Emily Anderson. What are your thoughts on break being a person playing on their phone?
Say that one more time.
So what are your
the break
thoughts
being a person playing on their phone?
Correct. Yes.
I think it depends on what they're doing. They don't want to do something on their phone that is going to, excite them or something like that, because they're really trying to sort of calm yourself, not overstimulate yourself. And so, if they're going into Facebook or something like that, that might not be the best option. But I will tell you, it's based on the individual, right? I may be able to go in and play solitaire, and that's a really good kind of calming activity for me. But if, Heather, you went in to play solitaire and it's timed, you're like, wait a minute, I got to get the best time, and that's not a good break for you. So you kind of have to figure out what is going to help the person sort of calm what they call the vagus nerve, calm that overstimulation down a little bit. And so a phone may be okay if they're listening to music, or if they're meditating, or if they're playing, some kind of game that can help them calm themselves. That can be very helpful.
And you have a question, Margaret. Can you unmic? Go ahead.
Yeah. I have and also a Navy SEALs veteran who, in his career, which involved cyber operations, he would use really loud, intense grunge or music. I don't even know what it is, but really intense music. And he said that would help ramp him up, prior to an operation or while doing what was focused work for him. And he's finding himself now in his retirement, doing that at times now in his current job when he's unable to concentrate, that it helps him focus. This is so antithetical to my understanding of what it takes to focus, especially because I am auditorily distractible. I'm not even sure how to approach the conversation with him. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So there was some research. This goes back to the multitasking thing. It's relevant, so bear with me for just a moment. There's some research where a group of students, freshman students, come in. They're asked the question, how well do you think you can do on this particular task? And they said, oh, we can, 90%, I'll be great. Okay. Or how well can you multitask? Because they were going to have them do multiple things. And they're like, oh, 90%, no problem at all. And then at the end, they got their score and it was like a 30%. We are not always as good as we think we are at multitasking. And I'm telling you this story because, one way is to see if there's something that you could do that would help this guy really determine whether or not he can focus better with that music. And the reason I say that is because I grew up in a very loud, noisy environment. And so I can't focus when it's quiet, right? I have the TV set on all the time. It annoys other people around. They're like, why do you watch? I'm not watching it. I just need the noise, right? So different people are going to be different. But if you want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to kind of brainstorm. I have a couple of other ideas of how, you might get him into that awareness phase of learning, right? Of, oh, maybe he's at that point where he thinks it still works for him because it always did. This is common after brain injury. Now we get to the awareness phase. It's like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't as good as I thought it was. And then now what strategies can we change in order to, in that learning phase, in order to really, make a difference for him? So please feel free to reach out if you'd like.
Thank you.
Okay, I will go on to, I'm going to do this real quick and then we won't spend as much time on this one, but this is what I call prepare what to say or finding your voice or something like that. And this is really more for the individuals with brain injury that might be joining us today. Preparing responses for those common questions that are often very difficult for you. So one of the things that tends to happen after brain injury is you get asked a lot of the same questions over and over again by different people. Hey, how come you're not working? Or, what are you doing in school or whatever? Certain, how's it going after your brain injury or things like that. And oftentimes you don't know how to answer those questions. And so that is an automatic sort of thing that sort of throws you off your game, if you will. And so doing this concept of preparing what to say, these are some of the questions that people might ask, like, how did you get your brain injury? Are you back to normal? People are not very savvy, so they're going to ask you some really insulting questions, and I'm just being honest with you, they will. Are you back to normal? What do you do? Sometimes you don't even know how to answer that question because it's like, well, I don't work and I'm trying to rehab, and you just don't know what to say. Again, a question that comes from ignorance, meaning they don't know what they don't know. Well, you look fine to me. How do you respond to that? And, getting really ticked off and yelling at them is not going to get you anywhere. And so this whole idea of kind of preparing what to say, finding your voice, here are some strategies for that. Know what your purpose is. If you know what your purpose is in whatever the conversation is that you're going to have with someone, that can be helpful. Ask yourself, what do I already know? If I know that I'm going to go have lunch with Heather and I know Heather asked me these questions, I need to know that up front because maybe I can preemptively, tell Heather some things so that she doesn't ask me those same questions over and over again. Another big issue after brain injury oftentimes is people apologize. You know, geez, I'm so sorry. You know, and there's really no reason to apologize for a lot of the stuff that individuals with brain injury apologize for. So keep that in mind. Prepare a very simple answer. You don't have to always give a whole bunch of details. Um, Trying to stay focused. Again, try to control the environment as best you can. I have rehearse here because, you know, you anticipate what some of these questions are going to be. You practice responding. And the more you practice, if we go back to those 4 stages of learning again, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. And eventually you're going to nail it. And those kinds of situations are not going to be as uncomfortable as they often are. So I'm going to move on to organization here just so that we can, you know, keep going because I know we have about 15 minutes and I think I've got 2 more areas to talk about. So organization is essentially arranging objects or performing tasks in a systematic and in a consistent way. Now, one of the things that gets forgotten about organization is that organization is not always stuff, right? It's not always objects. It can be organizing your thoughts. And a lot of times after brain injury, people have struggle organizing their thoughts. And when they can't organize their thoughts, they have a really hard time getting their points across. And again, all of these things can be problematic. So if you are a person living with a brain injury, you may want to sit down and do that brain dump, like I mentioned before, for attention. Write down everything that you want to talk to Brianna about if you have to talk to Brianna for a meeting or something. Write it down, and then you can organize it. And then once that information is organized, then you can check it off on your list or you can do whatever. And when you leave your meeting with Brianna, you will know what you went in there to do. You will know what you talked about. You will know what you didn't talk about. And it can really help a lot. So here's some organization scenarios. People struggle with finding items or information. Clutter on top of clutter is what one person calls it. It's just like there's just clutter on top of clutter on top of clutter. And I feel like, you know, I can't dig myself out of it. Where to put things, needing more cues to help remember information, and remembering really kind of what worked before doesn't work anymore. So again, after a brain injury, oftentimes people, you know, depending on their age and stuff, they have a lifetime of techniques and strategies and ways that they've done things. And after the brain injury, a lot of times those same old ways no longer work. That doesn't mean you can't ever use them, but it means you might have to modify them, pivot a little bit. And so this idea of recognizing that, you know what, these things are not working for me anymore, and therefore I may need to adjust the way I do things. This is why the stages of learning are so important. This is why the self-regulation process is so important. Those 2 things, stages of learning and self-regulation, apply to almost anything that you could do in your life. So what are some organizational strategies? Well, everything should have a place. Your keys should have a place, and it may be a hook by the front door. It can be on the countertop, but not on the countertop if that's a counter everyone uses and it's going to get moved easily. You want convenient places to store things. You want consistent places to store things. And you want places where people aren't going to be moving it. And so, you know, sometimes you might have to get like a little table to put by the front door. That's where your purse or your wallet or your keys or whatever goes. You want to group like things together, categorize stuff. You need to potentially work on a system that works for you. And again, that system that works for you may not be the other system that you used before your brain injury. And I will tell the practitioners here today, the system that works for a person with a brain injury probably isn't going to be your system. And so a lot of times what individuals with brain injury experience is, you know, oh, well, you need to do it this way. This will work for you. That doesn't, just because it works for you or I does not mean it's going to work for them. And so we have to be mindful of that, and we have to be respectful of that. And one of the things that I talk about when I talk about cognitive rehab is that cognitive rehabilitation is like an art and a science. And I was talking to someone in the field many years ago, and fairly well-known person in the field, and she's like, nope, it's a science. I'm like, it's an art, because you really have to be able to think outside of the box in order to help individuals with a brain injury. And so again, the science part of it is, this is a system that's been proved. It, has worked with 100 people. Great. It may work with 100 people, but the 101st person it may not work with. So please be mindful of that and be aware that if you're trying to help them with this, you may need to ask them what their system is, and you may need to help them modify that system. Not throw it out necessarily, but just modify it. Okay. Other strategies might be using emojis. I have people who use emojis in their email and in their calendar and in their, like, everywhere, because emojis are a visual cue and a very quick way to categorize things. And then also color, of course, is a good visual cue and a good visual way to categorize things. Okay, so let's see. Any questions on that?
No, we don't have any specific questions in the chat currently.
Okay. I'm going to move on. We have time management and decision making, and then we are done. So I think our timing will be just about right. So time management is another executive function, and it is something that is often disrupted after brain injury. Planning and monitoring, the definition here, planning and monitoring your schedule to ensure prioritized tasks are completed. Okay. One of the issues with time management is estimating how long things take to do. So if you are a practitioner or provider and your person is late, maybe it's because they are underestimating how long it takes to get to you. Or maybe they, don't have a strategy for getting out of the house in time. Maybe they, I don't know where everyone lives, but in California, you got to check your Google Maps or your Apple Maps or whatever to see how long it's going to take you to get somewhere because of traffic. Maybe they don't do that early enough to realize that, in fact, it's going to take them an extra half an hour because of something. Over planning, people with brain injuries often struggle with they over plan things. They can spend so much time trying to plan something that by the time they implement it, it's too late. And that is a common thing. Forgetting to do a task and then working on a project from beginning to end. Work on a project from beginning to end I'm not sure, something got messed up there. Sorry about that. This is one of those things where, see, I needed someone, my attention to detail was lacking a little bit. But so these are just some of the scenarios. Sorry for the lack of clarity there. Here are some strategies. Add more time when you're planning to do a task. I mentioned this for neurofatigue. Again, a lot of these strategies overlap. They generalize into other areas. So add more time. If you think something's going to take you half an hour, plan on 45 minutes. If you get to the place you're going a little bit early, great. Listen to music, play games on your phone, read a book, whatever. But it's going to alleviate the stress because you're going to have a plan and you won't be running late. Add time for breaks throughout the day. Set reminders to do a task so that you don't just forget, because memory, of course, is another one of those areas that's very difficult after brain injury. And set limits of how much time you're going to work on a particular task. You can always monitor. Remember, self-regulation, you plan, you monitor. So you get to the point where you're in the middle of the task and you realize, oh my gosh, this is going to take me a lot longer than I thought. Maybe it's time to just take a break from it and come back to it later. Okay. So I'm going to go on to decision making, and then we'll have a few minutes left for questions. So decision making is using information and reasoning to choose a course of action. And people after brain injury struggle with all sorts of decision making, like, where am I going to eat? What am I going to eat? You go out to eat and you get this menu that's got 50 things on it and you get overwhelmed. And that's frustrating for you, and it's frustrating for those around you. What class might you want to take? When do I need to leave for an appointment? What item should I purchase? These are all decision-making kinds of things. And ultimately, ultimately, some of the strategies are to identify all of your options, list some of the pros and cons, right? Limit the number of options that you look at. You don't have to look at 50 options. start by saying, okay, I'm going to look at the top 5 things here and I'm going to try and decide from that. Identify important or relevant criteria. Narrow your options based on that criteria. You might create a decision chart or a grid that can be very helpful. And then ultimately, talking to someone else can also be very helpful when it comes to decision making. So that's hopefully a lot of strategies that you can take away from this, whether you are a provider or a individual living with a brain injury.
Do we have any questions?
Going backwards, it does look like we have you heard of that music that confuses your brain to relax you? Bilateral music. And then I think there was just additional comments around that.
Yeah, I have heard, and again, I really think it's on a individual basis. I mean, I've heard of what you're talking about. I don't know what the research says about it. I think that there are certain kinds of things like, for instance, for me, Baroque music is the thing that sort of calms me and allows me to, and you're like, what? Baroque music? Baroque music is a really good memory tool also, and things like that. So I think you have to find what works for you. And I'll go back to what I said a few minutes ago. You know, don't assume that what works for you is going to work for the person you're working with, because it may not. And I've heard so many people with brain injury say, I worked with my therapist or I worked with my whatever, whoever it was, and they just kept telling me to do the same thing, and it just doesn't work for me. And that becomes frustrating for both people and very ineffectual.
Any further questions? Anybody? You can put your hand up as well. Brian, go ahead. Can you unmic?
Uh,
There you
well,
go.
I can unmic, I suppose. I don't know how you exactly do that there, Heather, but so I was wondering, because this is something I ran into when working in crisis intervention. What do you do when you're dealing with, say, somebody who is dealing with, say, has a word disassociation? Either they're talking in circles or they're using word salads.
Mhm.
How do you approach something in those situations when you're trying to help somebody with has a TBI that has those kinds of um, idiosyncrasies? I guess I don't know how to best to call them. So
Yeah, it would really depend obviously on what's going on with them. I will tell you that neurofatigue can cause all sorts of really weird symptoms. I was on a phone call on a Zoom with someone helping them a couple of years ago, and there was a lot of background noise. We were focused on something, and all of a sudden she couldn't talk. And I thought, oh, is she having a stroke? I'm on a Zoom call. I didn't even know the person's phone number, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what? And it was a neurofatigue. It was like a complete shutdown. And I see this happening. That's just one example, but I see this happening. So I can't tell you whether your word salad thing is because they're too tired or they've overwhelmed. They might need to just step back and, um, sit down and try and calm themselves. The one thing about neurofatigue, unfortunately, is that it's not like regular fatigue. You can't just sit down and recover from it. It it will go away when it's ready to go away. And when you kind of give it the respect that it's due, if you will, for lack of a better thing. If you keep pushing, it's going to keep getting worse and worse. And
so
so, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so the strategy here is to sit back and just let them let it take its course, so that it's
Yeah.
okay, so they can bring themselves back down.
Yeah, and they may not know how to do that, right? They may need help with some strategies to kind of do that. And if they get to the point where their speech is that disrupted and it's not normally that way, word salad is a phrase that is used a lot of times with mental illness, certain mental illnesses and stuff. I've heard it used with brain injury in terms of they just get so overwhelmed that they were not making sense, right? If it's a person with a brain injury and they're at that point where they're not making sense, in my opinion, for whatever that's worth, I'm not a medical doctor, but in my opinion, it's going to take them a while to get out of that. And so if you have a meeting with them for an hour, you're probably not going to see much change in them in that period of time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you for
Okay,
that.
sure.
So I'm gonna close us out. Again, if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to our Brain Injury Recovery Program. I'll add that to the chat, or Michelle Wild as well. Thank you, Michelle, for your wonderful presentation. I can't tell you how much we all appreciate your dedication to Brain Injury Awareness Month. Each year, Michelle has been willing to support our program, support our providers and veterans, and so just thank you again. I would also like to remind everyone we will be sending out a survey email at the by the end of today. And with that, we'll include the opportunity to receive a training certificate. So make sure to indicate that in your survey. We will also be including an attachment that will have Michelle's slides. So for those of you interested in those slides, that they will be included in that email. And then also, as mentioned, we will be posting the recorded session on our toolkit for future reference. So I've added that in our chat, the link to our toolkit, so make sure to reach out there. And then again, if you've enjoyed this webinar, our agency has the Veteran Training Support Center, and so they offer a variety of different trainings and different programs within the WDVA, so feel free to check out that for upcoming and additional trainings. And then Michelle, her organization, they do at bestconnections.org monthly webinars as well, so also a great resource. And last, I want to thank you all again, and I hope to see you at future events.
Thank you, guys. Hopefully we'll see you next year. And please feel free. I think my email is on the last slide. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to help in any way I can. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.